The sound came first, not of life, but of time itself. The faint tick of a clock, steady, unbroken, echoing through a room that had long forgotten laughter. Jakob Weiss sat hunched over his workbench, a magnifying lens pressed against one eye, his fingers steady despite the tremor of age. Before him lay the disassembled body of a pocket watch, gears, springs, and screws spread like the anatomy of a small mechanical heart. Outside, Warsaw was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows, too, much noise, the kind that remembers the echoes of fire and boots and cries that had once filled its streets. It was 1948, 3 years after the war had ended, and still, the city breathed like a wounded thing learning to stand again. Jakob lived above what had once been his father's shop, Weiss and Sons, watchmakers, since 1891. The and Sons part had become an ache in his chest. There were no sons anymore, only him. Every morning he wound the clocks that had survived the bombs, their faces cracked, their brass tarnished. He listened to them tick together, out of rhythm but still alive, and for a moment it sounded almost like prayer. His customers were few, widows, merchants, sometimes soldiers. They came with watches that had stopped during the war, hoping time could be convinced to start again. He charged little, sometimes nothing. Money meant less to him than silence and work. On the wall above his bench hung a photograph in a broken frame, his wife, Anna, and their son Daniel, taken before the occupation. Daniel had been 14 then, his hair too long, his grin too wide. He had wanted to be a musician, not a watchmaker. Jakob used to tease him that one day he would teach music to the clocks, make them sing instead of tick. That had been before the train, before the smoke. Now only the clocks sang, and only for him. One gray afternoon, as snow fell in slow, disinterested flakes, a shadow appeared in the doorway. Jakob didn't look up at first. He knew the sound of familiar customers. This wasn't one of them. The steps were careful, uncertain. "Is this the shop of Jakob Weiss?" a voice asked. Young, male, with an accent Jakob hadn't heard in years. He raised his eyes. Standing there was a man in a worn military coat, no insignia left on it, but the shape was unmistakable. German. Jakob's hands froze on the tiny screwdriver. For a moment, even the clocks seemed to stop. "Yes," he said finally, his voice thin. "Who's asking?" The young man removed his cap. His hair was fair, his face drawn, eyes too old for his age. "My name is Lucas Bauer," he said quietly. "Someone told me you repair pocket watches." Jakob's eyes narrowed. "I repair what still wants to live." The man nodded, hesitated, and reached into his coat. When he placed the watch on the counter, Jakob felt his breath catch. It was a silver pocket watch, dented and scratched, the kind made before the war. The engraving on the back was faint, but Jakob could still read the initials, D.W. Daniel Weiss. He didn't touch it. Couldn't. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice colder than the room. Lucas hesitated. "It was found," he said, "in Krakow, among the things left behind." Jakob stared at him, unblinking. "Things?" The young man swallowed. "I didn't mean disrespect. Who gave it to you?" "I don't know. I've carried it since the war. It never worked, but I couldn't throw it away." Jakob leaned forward, eyes sharp behind the lens. "Why not?" Lucas's gaze dropped to the floor. "Because it felt wrong, like it belonged to someone who mattered." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Jakob reached out and took the watch, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. "It does," he said quietly. That night, after the man left, Jakob sat in the dim glow of his oil lamp, the watch open before him. The gears were rusted, the balance spring broken, the dial cracked, but when he turned it in his hand, he could still feel the weight of memory inside it, the kind that refused to die. He worked through the night, the magnifying glass pressed close, each motion deliberate, reverent. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, time bled from his fingers like light through fog. He replaced the spring, polished the gears, adjusted the escapement. When at last he wound it, the faintest tick answered him, hesitant at first, then steady. Jakob closed his eyes. The sound filled the room like breath returning to lungs. He whispered, "Welcome back, my boy." Morning came pale and fragile. Jakob placed the repaired watch on the counter, wrapped in a square of velvet. He stared at it for a long time, then opened the drawer beneath the bench. Inside were letters, unopened, unsent, yellow with years. Letters to Daniel. He added another. "You came back in a stranger's hands. I do not know why, or how, or what I am meant to forgive, but the clock ticks again, and so I must too." He sealed it, placed it with the others, and waited. When Lucas returned that afternoon, the bells above the door jingled softly. Jakob was standing at the counter, the watch in front of him. "It's fixed," he said simply. Lucas looked surprised. "That fast? Time doesn't like to wait." He lifted the watch, listened to it tick. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "You have a gift." Jakob met his eyes. "Gifts come with a price." Lucas frowned slightly. "How much do I owe you?" Jakob shook his head. "You can't pay it." "Please," Lucas insisted. "I want to." The old man's gaze softened, though his voice stayed low. "Then come back tomorrow," he said. "There is something you should hear." Lucas returned the next day, just as the morning frost was melting from the windows. The shop looked smaller in daylight, the glass fogged, the clocks crowding the walls like patient hearts waiting for permission to beat again. Jakob was already at his bench, polishing the rim of an old mantel clock. He didn't look up when the bell above the door rang. "You came," he said simply. "I said I would." Jakob gestured toward the chair opposite him. "Sit. Listen." Lucas sat, the air heavy with the ticking of dozens of clocks, each one slightly out of sync, a chorus of imperfection that somehow formed a single rhythm. Jakob spoke without turning. "Do you know how a clock keeps time?" Lucas shook his head. "Not really." "There is a wheel," Jakob said, "and a spring. The spring gives the wheel life. The wheel controls the spring's heartbeat. One without the other is chaos." He paused, his fingers steady on the brass casing. "During the war, they broke everything that made us whole. Springs, wheels, hearts, people. And now I spend my days trying to make things tick again." Lucas lowered his gaze. "You think that's possible?" Jakob turned to face him. "For clocks, yes. For men, I'm still not sure." Silence followed. A silence. That didn't hurt this time, only lingered like breath before a confession. Lucas reached into his coat and placed the watch on the counter once more. "I've been thinking about it since yesterday," he said. "About whose it was." Jakob didn't answer. "I was 15 when they sent me to the front," Lucas continued. "Near the end, my father was an officer. He thought it would make a man out of me." He let out a hollow laugh. "It made something else." He looked at Jakob. "I saw things no one should see. I did things no one should forgive. After the war, I tried to work, to live, but every tick of every clock reminded me that someone's time had stopped because of me." Jakob studied him carefully, the tremor in his voice, the twitch of his hand as it brushed the watch. "And yet," Jakob said softly, "you carry this." Lucas nodded, "Because it felt alive, like it wanted to be fixed." Jakob leaned closer. Maybe it wasn't the watch that wanted that. Lucas's eyes met his. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the clocks filled the space, whispering truth in their patient language. When Lucas finally rose to leave, Jakob said, "Come back tomorrow. There is more to mend than gears." Lucas hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" Jakob turned back to his workbench. "Because time has a strange sense of mercy. It brings things back. Sometimes the wrong things, sometimes the right ones. I haven't decided which you are yet." That night, Jakob dreamt. He saw Daniel sitting at the workbench, his small fingers turning a screwdriver far too large for his hand. The boy smiled, the same half grin that had survived even the worst memories. "Papa," he said, "if you fix enough clocks, will you fix the world?" Jakob's throat tightened. "I don't know." "Then keep trying," the boy said. "Because when you stop, time stops too." He woke before dawn, his cheeks wet, the clocks ticking in the dark like 1,000 small reminders that the world was still turning. The next day, Lucas came earlier, carrying something wrapped in a handkerchief. "I brought this," he said, placing it on the counter. Jakob unfolded the cloth. Inside was another watch, older, gold, its casing engraved with a small cross. "It was my father's," Lucas said quietly. He didn't survive either. Jakob turned it over in his hand. The watch was well made, but its hands were still, frozen at 3:15. He opened the back carefully, examining the mechanism. It's in better condition than most, he said. Just stopped. He looked at Lucas. Do you want it to work again? Lucas hesitated. I don't know. Then let's find out, Jakob said. He set the old man's watch beside Daniel's on the table, two hearts from opposite lives now silent together. Then he wound them both. Hours passed. Jakob's tools danced. Tweezers, oil brush, screwdriver. His hands moved with the patience of prayer. Lucas watched, wordless. When the second watch finally ticked, the sound was softer than the first, slower, like a heartbeat learning to trust itself again. Jakob smiled faintly. They run together, he said. Lucas blinked. What do you mean? Look, Jakob pointed. Both watches ticked in near unison, one slightly ahead, one just behind. Different springs, Jakob said. Different makers, but the rhythm finds a way. He leaned back, his eyes glistening. That's how time forgives us. It doesn't make us the same. It lets us beat beside what we once destroyed. That evening, Lucas lingered by the door. I don't think I deserve this, he said. Jakob replied without looking up. No one deserves mercy. That's why it's mercy. He paused, then added, You can leave the watch here tonight. I'll make sure it stays in time. Lucas hesitated, then placed both watches on the counter, his father's and Daniel's. Maybe they'll keep each other company. Jakob nodded. Yes, maybe they will. Later, when the door closed and the snow began, again, Jakob sat with the two watches ticking side by side. The sound filled the shop, not perfectly aligned, but together, like conversation after years of silence. He whispered to no one, Forgive us our hours. Outside, Warsaw slept beneath the falling snow, and for the first time in years, Jakob didn't feel completely alone. The snow didn't stop that week. It fell endlessly, soft and patient, like the world trying to hide its own scars. Jakob worked longer hours than usual. Something in him had shifted, not quite healed, but opened. For the first time in years, he didn't dread the sound of the clocks. Their ticking no longer accused him of surviving. It reminded him that he still could. Lucas came every day now. Sometimes he brought firewood, sometimes bread. They didn't talk about the war anymore. Instead, they spoke of small things, gears, metals, springs, as if discussing the anatomy of forgiveness itself. And every night, before Lucas left, two watches lay side by side on the counter, Daniel's and Lucas's father's, ticking imperfectly but together. One evening, Lucas arrived later than usual. The street outside was dark, the air heavy with the promise of more snow. Jakob was at his bench, his lamp casting a small island of light. When he saw Lucas, he smiled faintly, the kind of smile that had taken him years to remember how to make. You're late, he said. I had to go somewhere first, Lucas replied, unbuttoning his coat. His breath came in white cloud. The cemetery. I didn't know which grave was his, so I just stood there and listened. Jakob nodded. Sometimes that's enough. Lucas looked at him for a long moment. You knew him, didn't you? The boy whose watch I brought. Jakob's hands stilled. Yes. Silence filled the shop, deep as snow. Lucas lowered his eyes. Then I shouldn't have come. Jakob rose slowly. And yet you did. He walked to the window. The frost on the glass caught the lamplight, breaking it into shards. You remind me of him sometimes, Jakob said quietly. Not in face, but in the way you look at the world. Like you're afraid it will disappear if you blink. Lucas swallowed hard. You should hate me. Jakob turned to him. I did, he said. Every day. I hated all of you. But hate is a strange clock. It winds itself until it breaks. He paused. And when it stops, all that's left is silence. That's where forgiveness begins. For a long while, Lucas didn't speak. Then he took a small object from his coat. Another watch, older, battered. It doesn't work, he said. It belonged to someone I'll never know. I found it in the ruins of Warsaw when I first came here. Jakob took it carefully. You carry too many ghosts. I'm trying to return them, Lucas said. Jakob smiled faintly. Then let's see if this one still remembers how to live. He opened the casing. The inside was nearly rusted through. The gears were worn, but still. There. Still whole. "It's enough," he murmured. "Always enough." He began to work, his fingers slow but sure. Lucas watched in silence as metal met light, as the faint heartbeat of time tried once more to rise from the dead. Minutes passed. Then faintly, a tick. Lucas exhaled, almost in disbelief. "You did it again?" Jakob shook his head. "No, it did it itself. I only reminded it how." The younger man leaned forward, eyes bright with something between gratitude and sorrow. "You? No? Sometimes I wonder what your son would think of this." Jakob smiled, his eyes far away. "He'd probably say the same thing I told him once, that time is the only language left when words fail." He lifted the newly repaired watch and placed it in Lucas's hand. "Keep this one," he said, "not as a burden, but as a promise." Lucas frowned slightly. "A promise of what?" Jakob looked toward the wall of clocks, all ticking, all imperfect. "That we can't fix everything, but we can keep it from stopping." A few days later, Lucas didn't come. The snow fell heavier than before, and Jakob told himself it was only the weather. But by the third day, the shop felt emptier, the air colder, the silence heavier. He found himself listening to the doorbell that never rang, to the echoes between the ticks. Finally, on the fourth evening, a knock came. Jakob hurried to the door, but it wasn't Lucas. It was a postman, his cheeks red from the cold. "Letter for you," he said. "No? Return address." Jakob took it with trembling hands. Inside was a folded note and something wrapped in cloth. He opened the note first. "Jakob, I am leaving Warsaw. There is work rebuilding in Dresden, and I think it's time I learn how to build, not destroy. You gave me back something I didn't deserve, a chance to live without hate. Keep Daniel's watch. Let it tick for both of us." Lucas Jacob unwrapped the cloth. Inside was the gold watch, Lucas's father's, still ticking. He held it for a long time, the sound steady in his palm. Then he placed it beside Daniel's on the counter, where they could keep each other company. That night, Jakob didn't wind any clocks. He simply sat, listening to the harmony of two heartbeats made of brass and forgiveness. He spoke softly, as if to someone beside him. "You see, Daniel? Even broken things can teach others how to keep going." Outside, the wind moved through the alleys, whispering between the ruins like breath between prayers. And for the first time in many years, when Jakob closed his eyes, he didn't see the flames of the ghetto or the trains or the smoke. He saw his son at the workbench, smiling. The boy was winding a clock that never stopped. 5 years later, when neighbors broke down the door to Jakob's shop after days without seeing him, they found him at his bench, head resting on folded arms, a faint smile frozen on his lips. The two watches sat before him, ticking in unison. A small note lay between them, written in a careful, aging hand. "To whoever finds this place, remember that time is not what we lose, but what we give. Forgive the hours that hurt. Keep the ones that heal." Jakob Weiss. They buried him next to his family in the Jewish cemetery, beneath a pine tree whose branches never seemed to stop moving. Years later, when the shop was turned into a museum exhibit, visitors would stop before the two watches sealed behind glass. They always ticked together, perfectly synchronized, though no one ever wound them again. If this story touched you, remember, forgiveness is not the end of memory. It is how memory keeps breathing. Every second that passes is a chance to choose mercy over silence. Subscribe to Voices from the Camps and help us keep alive the stories of those who found humanity in the ruins of history. Because remembrance is not about the past. It's about what we choose to repair, even when the world forgets to tick.